Welcome back to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. So, have you ever noticed how people love Jesus when he's doing miracles and giving blessings and all these good things, but get real quiet when he starts correcting things? So that's exactly where we are at today. So in this episode, we're covering Matthew's 21 through 25. And this is where everything starts to shift. I feel like I always say that, but Jesus enters Jerusalem as king. But instead of taking a throne, he flips tables, challenges religious leaders, and starts exposing what real faith actually looks like. So we're talking about, like powerful parables, uncomfortable truth, end times warnings, and what it really means to be ready when he returns. This isn't surface level faith. This is a heart check, life check, and everything check, really. So grab your drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. I only have water today. Let me take a sip. All right. So, picture this. Jesus is finally approaching Jerusalem, the big stage, right? This isn't random. This is intentional, calculated, and honestly, both in a way that would make most people sweat. So he sends two disciples ahead with oddly specific instructions. He says, "Go into the village. You'll find a donkey tied there and her colt. Untie them and bring them to me." So no explanation, no backup plan, just trust. And somehow it works. If anyone questions them, they're told to say the Lord needs them, and that's enough. Imagine that happening in the modern times and the police, and you tell the police like, "Oh, the Lord needs them." Imagine how you would look like, right? But so that right there already tells you something about Jesus' authority. He doesn't argue, he just declares. So he rides into Jerusalem not on a war horse like a conquering king, but on a donkey. Humble, peaceful, intentional. And the people, well, they lose it. They go crazy for it. So cloaks on the ground, palm branches everywhere, shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David," right? Which is basically saying, "Save us now, Messiah." So they recognize something big is happening, even if they don't fully understand what kind of king he actually is, or that, the fact that he's not what everybody was expecting, because everybody expected the Messiah to be this, great, big, I don't know, muscly person, coming to Jerusalem to save them, riding I don't know, a horse or something like that. I don't know. But and also they're expecting political rescue, which is not what Jesus is doing at all. Jesus is bringing something way deeper. Political issues, that's nothing. That's really surface level problem. So spiritual rescue, the kind that does not fit their immediate expectations. The whole city is stirred. People are asking like, "Who is this?" And the crowds answer, "Oh, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." So notice that prophet, not yet fully grasping he's more than that. They're close, but not quite there. So Jesus walks straight into the temple, no hesitation, and this is where things shift from celebration to confrontation real quick. It gets crazy. So he sees people buying and selling, turning a place meant for prayer into basically a marketplace. So he flips tables, drives people out, and says, "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are, or yeah, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." Right? Because you go there, you go to the temple to make your sacrifices, right? Your sacrifice and all that stuff. But then they have like vendors, like people selling the things that you need to sacrifice for whatever you're doing your offering for, right? Um, and they're profiting off of it pretty much. And that's not what the temple is supposed to be. You know, you're supposed to just bring your own, okay? So if you need to make an offering, um, bring your own, right? Find somewhere else. The temple itself should not be the place where you buy your own offering, right? But anyways, so pretty much Jesus got angry, right? But this is righteous anger, controlled, purposeful, but intense. It was really intense. He's not mad for no reason, but calling out corruption, exploitation, and the fact that people turned worship into profit. Um, and right after the chaos, something interesting happens. The blind and the lame come to him in the temple. And just like that, Jesus heals them. Flips from, like being angry to like lashing out to like, oh, healing. So while he's tearing down what's broken, he's also restoring what's hurting. Same Jesus, justice and mercy back to back. Meanwhile, the chief priests and teachers of the law are watching all of this and they're not impressed. They're furious. And also I believe they're making money off of the profits that those vendors really make from selling offerings, right? Especially when they hear children shouting like, Hosanna to the Son of God or the Son of David. Kids get it before the leaders do. That has got the sting, right? They question Jesus about it, basically saying, do you hear what these kids are saying? And Jesus responds like, yeah, and scripture already said this would happen. So he's not backing down. Then he leaves the city and goes to Bethany for the night, because even revolutionary or revolution needs a place to crash, right? So next morning he's heading back to the temple and he's hungry. So on the way there he sees a fig tree by the road. This part is so funny. This is funny because I just saw a video um yesterday of God asking Jesus, like, okay, just so you know, when you go to earth, this is what's gonna happen. They're gonna mock you, they're gonna this and that, and then you will be crucified. Are you ready? And Jesus is like, yes, I'm ready. And then God was like, oh, by the way, there is going to be this fig tree that does not bear fruit. And then apparently on that funny video, that's the only thing that's pretty much makes Jesus kind of like angry for real. But anyway, so it's funny that I'm talking about this specific part of the Bible now, and I just saw that video yesterday. Anyway, so he sees a fig tree by the road. It looks promising, right? Full of leaves. But when he gets there, there's no fruit, just leaves. So he says, may you never bear fruit again. And instantly the tree withers. So the disciples are, to me, this is so funny. But there's a lesson to this, right? But it's just kind of funny if you just kind of like look at it on a surface level. But anyways, the disciples are shocked because that's not normal behavior for trees. But this isn't really about the tree, it's a living metaphor. The tree looked alive, looked fruitful, but nothing real to offer. So that's Israel's spiritual condition at the time. A lot of appearance, not much substance, right? So that's pretty much the message, the deeper message. So Jesus uses it to teach about faith. Real, active, bold faith. He tells them that if they truly believe and don't doubt, they can do things that seem impossible. Not because they're magical, but because they're connected to God's power. Faith is not passive, it moves. Then he goes back to the temple, and now the leaders are done being quiet. They confront him directly. By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority? So, translation, what do you think you are? Right? So, Jesus does not answer them straight up. Instead, he flips it. He asks about John the Baptist. Was his baptism from heaven or human origin? Now they're stuck. If they say heaven, Jesus will ask why they didn't believe him. If they say human, the crowd will turn on them because people believe John was a prophet. So they cop out and say, we don't know. And they basically, and Jesus basically says, then I'm not answering your question either. Strategic silence. Jesus is so funny. Like, actually, you read the Bible, he's so funny. Like, he has all these, like, jokes that, like, you kind of have to know him to know that they're kind of jokes. But he's so funny. Anyways, so he's not playing their games. Then he tells them a story. A father asks his two sons to work in the vineyard. One says no, but later changes his mind and goes. The other says yes, but never actually does. So simple question. Which one did what the father wanted? So obviously the first, right? And Jesus uses that to call them out. Tax collectors and prostitutes, the people they look down on, are entering the kingdom ahead of them. Why? Because those people actually repented and believed, while the religious leaders just talked a good game but didn't follow through. Then another parable. He talks about another parable. A landowner plants a vineyard, sets it all up, and rents it out to tenants. When harvest time comes, he sends servants to collect his share. The tenants beat one, and they kill another, and then stone another, right? So he sends more servants, and the same result. Finally, he sends his own son, thinking they'll respect him. Instead, they kill him, thinking they can take the inheritance. It's brutal. Jesus asks what the owner will do to those tenants. The leaders answer without realizing they're condemning themselves. They say, He will bring those wretches to a wretched end." And Jesus basically says, exactly. Then he quotes scripture about the stone the builders rejected becoming the cornerstone. That's him. Rejected now, essential later. So the message lands hard. The chief priests and Pharisees realize he's talking about them. Not subtle at all. They want to arrest him, but they're scared of the crowd because people see him as a prophet. So they back off for now. And then just like that, the tension is thick. Jesus isn't just teaching nice lessons anymore. He's exposing hearts, flipping systems, and making it very clear that outward religion without real transformation means nothing. So this chapter isn't gentle. It's a mirror. It asks a pretty uncomfortable question. Are you the fig tree with leaves but no fruit? Saying the right things, looking the part, but when it actually matters, nothing is there. Or are you the first son who messed up initially, but eventually did the right thing? So God seems a lot more interested in genuine change than perfect words, right? You don't need to be those people who are very eloquent in prayer, but deep inside, what they're praying for is not really, what they mean. They just want to sound nice and good and smart, right? But it's not really what's in their hearts. Something like that. Also, Jesus flipping tables is a reminder that not everything labeled spiritual is actually aligned with God. So sometimes the most religious looking spaces need the biggest cleanup, right? You get it? Okay, fun fact corner. Because your brain deserves a snack after all that intensity of, what chapter is that? Chapter 21. So the whole donkey situation wasn't random at all. It fulfills a prophecy from Zechariah 9, verse 9. about the king coming humble and riding on a donkey. So Jesus wasn't just entering Jerusalem. He was basically saying, I am the king, without shouting it directly. Also, fig trees normally produce fruit before full leaves. So seeing a leafy tree with no fruit was already a sign something was off. So that makes the whole moment even more symbolic. It wasn't just disappointing, it was deceptive. All right, chapter 22. Jesus is still in Jerusalem, still surrounded by people who are trying very hard to trap him like he's some kind of theological escape room, right? And instead of backing off, he leans in harder. He starts with another parable because apparently that's his favorite way to expose people without, naming them, even though everyone still knows it's about them. That's why it's so funny. So he tells the story of a king preparing a wedding banquet for his son. This one actually, I had to read this parable like a lot of times before I actually kind of got it. And I'm still kind of a little bit confused. But anyways, yeah, some of the parables are just like kind of, you won't interpret it or you won't get it right away. Like you have to read it like 10 times. But anyway, so he tells a story about the king preparing for a wedding banquet for his son. So, big deal, royal, lavish, the kind of invitation you don't ignore unless you have 0 cents. So the king sends out servants to call those who were invited, but they refuse to come. Not, I'm busy, not maybe later, just straight up rejection. So he sends more servants explaining talk. Explaining the feast is ready. Everything's prepared. Come through. And the response, people brush it off. Like one goes back to his field, another to his business, life as usual, whatever. Then it escalates. Some of them don't just ignore the invitation. They mistreat the servants and kill them. Like what? Imagine somebody invites you to a very fancy wedding and then you kill the messenger. That doesn't make sense, right? But some of them, that's what they did. Not just rude, plain out wrong. Like what? Anyways, and rebellion because the invitation is from the king. So the king responds how you'd expect a king to respond when his messengers are murdered. Like judgment, swift and final. But here's a twist. The king doesn't cancel the wedding. He opens the invitation to anyone and everyone. Like literally everyone. Like even like homeless people, people like, yeah, literally everyone. So servants go out in the streets and gather all they can find, both good and bad, filling the banquet hall. That right there is grace in action. The original invitees rejected it, so now the door is wide open to people who weren't even on the original guest list. But when Jesus throws in a detail that makes people pause, so the king notices a man not wearing wedding clothes. And back then, that mattered. You don't just roll into a royal wedding like you're running errands at Target, right? The man had no excuse. Or he has no excuse. He's speechless and he gets thrown out. Now, before people start side-eyeing this, like, wow, that's harsh. I mean, he invited them. They showed up. Maybe they don't have better clothes. So let's get the point. The invitation is open to all, but you don't enter the kingdom on your own terms. There's a response required, a transformation. You don't just show up unchanged and expect everything to be fine. Grace invites you, but it also changes you. So Jesus wraps it up with, many are invited, but few are chosen. So my translation, the door is open, but not everyone actually responds the right way. And the Pharisees, they know he's talking about them. So now they switch tactics. If they can't beat him with parables, they'll trap him with questions, right? So the first trap, taxes, classic. Um, so they send their disciples along with some Herodians, which is ironic because those two groups don't even like each other. But nothing brings people together like a shared goal of trying to corner Jesus, right? Like the enemy of my enemy is my friend or something like that. I don't know. Um, yeah. So they come in fake uh respectful, right? Saying, "Teacher, we know you're a man of integrity." Like, yeah, okay, flattery level 110. And they ask, "Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" So this is a loaded question. If Jesus says yes, the Jewish people will feel like he's siding with Rome. If he says no, he is being reported as a rebel. So Jesus sees right through it. He calls them out. I actually love it. He says, "You hypocrites." Not subtle. Then he asks for a coin and says, "Whose image is this?" Like, he has a coin and said, "Whose image is this?" They answer, "Caesar's." And he drops the line that's been quoted for centuries. "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Right? So the answer is annoyingly brilliant. He avoids their trap completely. So yes, fulfill your earthly responsibilities, but don't forget your life, your soul, your everything belongs to God. They came for a debate and left speechless. So the next group steps up. The Sadducees. These people, they don't believe in anything supernatural, right? So they don't believe in resurrection. They don't believe in angels. So pretty much anything supernatural. Um, so so naturally, they try to use a weird hypothetical question to make it look ridiculous. They tell a story about a woman who marries 7 brothers, one after another, because each one dies. So dark story, honestly. Then they ask, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be? I actually like Jesus' answer to this. Like, anyway, so they think they've got him, right? Jesus basically says, "You don't even understand the scripture or the power of God." Then he explains that in the resurrection, people won't marry like they do now. It's not the same system. They'll be like angels in heaven. Then he goes deeper. He points to scripture where God says, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," not "I was." So present tense, meaning they're alive to him. Right? Do you feel what I feel? Anyway, so God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So yes, resurrection is real. The crowd is amazed. The Sadducees silenced. At this point, it's almost embarrassing how every group that tries to trap Jesus ends up getting intellectually folded. But the Pharisees aren't done yet. They send in a lawyer to ask what they think is the ultimate question. So he asks, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" I love this too. Everybody loves this. Out of all the 600 plus commandments, pick one. Seems impossible, right? Because there's a lot of commandments, rules, whatnot. Jesus answers without hesitation. Love the Lord with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. Total devotion, not partial, not convenient, not when you feel like it. Everything. Then he adds, and the second is like it, so just as equal as it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then he drops the summary. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Basically, everything boils down to love. So when people trust you, do you believe, or when somebody asks you, like, do you believe in true love? Yes, because it's the greatest commandment of all. Oh. Anyway, so love for God and love for people, not shallow, not performative, but real, active, sacrificial love. If you miss that, you miss the whole point, no matter how religious you look. And just when you think it's over, Jesus flips the script one more time. Now he asks them a question. What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? They answer, the son of David. That's, the expected answer back then. The Messiah would come from David's line. Then Jesus hits them with Psalm 110. David calls the Messiah Lord. So how can the Messiah be both David's son and his Lord? Now they're stuck because they're thinking in human terms, lineage and hierarchy, but Jesus is pointing to something bigger. Messiah isn't just a descendant, he's more than that. He's divine, right? So no one can answer him, and from that day on, no one dares to ask him any more question, which honestly feels like the intellectual version of getting knocked out in one round. So this chapter is basically a spotlight on how people respond to God. Some ignore him because they're too busy. Some reject him outright. Some try to outsmart him. And a few actually receive what's being offered by him. The wedding banquet hits hard because it shows that being invited isn't the same as being ready, and that the render to Caesar moment, it quietly checks your priorities. You handle your life here, sure, but your heart belongs to God. Yeah, you still live your life here on earth, but your heart belongs to God. And the greatest commandment part, it sounds simple, but it's really not, honestly. Like, imagine being commanded to love the person who hates you the most, right? Or who've hurt you so bad that you have traumas forever, right? Loving God truly and loving people genuinely is harder than memorizing rules. It requires transformation, complete transformation. You have to fully surrender everything and everything to God, and then transformation will automatically come. But it's hard to fully surrender everything, right? Imagine surrendering your anxiety. That's so hard. Like, we have even just, daily anxieties. Like, oh, what if I'm late for work? What if I'm not, little things like that, right? Anyways, so fun fact corner. So wedding garments at royal banquets were sometimes provided by the host. So showing up without one could mean you either rejected what was given or didn't care enough to wear it. So that makes the story even deeper, actually. Um, yeah. So yeah, that's all I have. All right. Chapter 23. Um, yeah. So Jesus returns to the crowd and his disciples, and instead of answering traps this time, he starts exposing. He acknowledges that the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, meaning they have authority to teach the law. So he tells the people to listen to what they teach. Plot twist though, but do not do what they do, because they don't practice what they preach. That's around well, that's a hard no opening line, or that's a deep opening line. Imagine being called out like that in public. He describes them as people who load others down with heavy burdens but won't lift a finger to help. They make religion complicated, exhausting, and honestly kind of unbearable, while they themselves avoid the weight of it. Everything they do is for the show, for show. They wear these big noticeable whatever gowns that they wear, which are basically, or no. Anyways, anyways. So they love the best seats, the honor, the public recognition. They want people greeting them with titles like rabbi, and Jesus just dismantles the whole mindset. He tells his followers not to chase titles like that. Don't elevate yourself above others spiritually. There's one teacher, one father, one instructor, and the greatest among you should be a servant. That flips everything upside down. In a world obsessed with status, Jesus is like, cool, now go humble yourself. Whoever exalts themselves will be humbled, and whoever humbles themselves will be lifted. That's the kingdom system, really. Like, it's always the opposite. It does not care about your ego. Throw away your ego. Then it gets intense. Like, you might want to sit up a little straighter for this, just like how I did. So Jesus goes into what people call the seven woes, which is basically a series of very direct, very sharp rebukes. And he keeps repeating, "Woe to you, teacher of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites." He's not whispering this, by the way. First, he calls them out for shutting the door of the kingdom in people's faces. They're not entering and they're preventing others from entering too. Imagine being a spiritual leader and actually blocking people from God. That is wild. Then he talks about how they go all out to convert someone, like traveling land and sea, only to turn that person into an even worse version of themselves. That's not discipleship. That's multiplication of dysfunction. Next, he calls them blind guides because they make these ridiculous distinctions about oaths, swearing by the temple. That's nothing. Swearing by the gold of the temple, now that counts. Jesus is basically like, are you even hearing yourselves? They're missing the bigger point entirely. They focus on technicalities instead of truth. Then he hits them with the famous line about tithing spices. They're carefully measuring out mint, dill, and cumin to give a tenth, which sounds very precise and holy, but they neglect justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Jesus isn't saying tithing is bad. He literally says they should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. But they're obsessing over minor details while ignoring what I feel like I talk too much. It's so hard to talk now. While ignoring what actually matters. Imagine your church knowing how much you really make, your income, and trying to make sure that you're giving your tithing down to the cents. That is pretty much what they're doing, right? So, yeah. So you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. That image is ridiculous on purpose. Tiny problem over analyzed, massive issues completely ignored. Then he goes after their obsession with outward appearance. They clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside is full of greed and self-indulgence. So basically they look clean, but internally not so much. It's all yucky in there, you know. Jesus says, "First clean the inside, then the outside will also be clean." He's not impressed by appearances. Never was. Then he compares them to whitewashed tombs, which sounds poetic until you realize what it means. Tombs were painted white to look clean, but inside, dead bones, right? So he's saying you look righteous on the outside, but inside you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness, like you're dead on the inside. That's not a light insult. That's a full demotion. And then he calls out their fake honor for the prophets. They build tombs for them and say, if we had lived back then, we wouldn't have killed the prophets. Meanwhile, they're literally plotting against Jesus, the ultimate messenger. He calls them out for being descendants of those who killed the prophets and basically says, you're finishing what they started. It's like watching someone condemn history while actively repeating it. And then Jesus says something that honestly lands heavy. He talks about how God has sent prophets, wise men, teachers, and they were killed, crucified, flogged, chased from town to town. And the responsibility for all the bloodshed will come upon this generation. That's not just correction, that is judgment. He calls them snakes, brood of vipers, and asks how they will escape being condemned. There's no sugarcoating here. This is what happens when religious authority is used to control instead of serve. But then the tone shifts. And it's kind of heartbreaking. Jesus looks at Jerusalem and says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and the stone those who sent to you." You can feel the grief in that repetition. Like, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. That's not anger, that's sorrow at that point. Like he wanted to protect them, care for them, bring them in, and they refused. So he tells them their house is left desolate and that they won't see him again until they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." There's still a hint of hope there, but it's tied to recognition, to repentance. Whew, that was heavy. This chapter is uncomfortable on purpose. It's not just about, those bad Pharisees and Sadducees back then. It's a warning about what happens when faith becomes performance, when image matters more than integrity, when people use God to elevate themselves instead of serving others. It also forces a personal check. Are you focusing on small, visible good deeds while ignoring bigger issues like compassion, justice, and honesty? Because Jesus clearly cares more about what's happening inside than how polished you look on the outside. Whew. All right. Where are we now? 24? Chapter 24? So, so So the last part that I talk about with Jerusalem, it reminds you that even when people reject him, Jesus' heart is still together, right? So what am I trying to say? So the rejection doesn't come from him pushing people away. It comes from people refusing to come close. Okay. Actually, we're not on chapter 24 yet. I have a fun fact corner. Okay, so because we deserve a quick breather after all that verbal demolition. So I didn't really mention this, but oh, I did mention it. So the whitewashed tombs were very visible markers, so people wouldn't accidentally become ceremonially unclean. So calling someone that wasn't just insulting, it was culturally loaded, and that you know and also the phrase brood of vipers, it's not just dramatic, it's linking them to deception and danger, basically saying they look religious but are actually spiritually toxic. Yeah. Yep. Okay, now chapter 24. So, so Jesus is leaving the temple, and his disciples are doing that thing people do when they're impressed by architecture. Like, oh, look at these buildings. And honestly, fair. The temple was massive, beautiful, a symbol of stability and God's presence. But Jesus immediately drops a statement that probably made their stomachs flip. He says, "Do you see all these things? Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." So yeah, no warm up, just straight into everything you think is permanent, it's not. That alone is enough to make anyone uneasy. Later, they sit on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples finally ask what everyone would ask: when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Basically, give us a timeline. Humans love timelines. Jesus does not give them one. Instead, he starts with a warning, which is why we should all be ready. But every second of your everyday, you should be ready. But, anyways, he says, "Watch out that no one deceives you. Not watch the signs first, but watch people." Because apparently, deception is going to be a major issue. Many will come claiming to be the Messiah and will lead people astray. That already tells you this isn't about events, it's about discernment. Then he lists what sounds like chaos: wars, rumors of war. I mean, there's a currently now, nations rising against nations, famines, earthquake, and just when you think, okay, that must be it. This must be it. He says, this is just the beginning of birth pains, not the end, the beginning, which is honestly unsettling because it means things ramp up, not settle down. Then it gets personal. Followers of Jesus will be handed over, persecuted, even killed, hated by all nations because of him. That's not exactly a recruitment pitch, right? And he says, many will turn away from faith, betray each other, hate each other. False prophets will rise, wickedness will increase, love grows cold. That line right there, the love of most will grow cold. That's heavy, not just fear, not just chaos, but emotional numbness. Imagine, like, that's how bad it's gonna be. Anyway, so people losing compassion, losing warmth, and in the middle of that, Jesus says, the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. So you gotta stand firm, no matter how hard it is, no matter how broken you are, how, you know. So, yeah. And then he says something that shifts the tone a bit. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So even in all the chaos, the mission continues. God's message does not get canceled by circumstances, it spreads. Then Jesus talks about something called the abomination that causes desolation, referencing the prophet Daniel. Now the disciples would have recognized that phrase as something serious, something tied to desecration and crisis. He says, when you see it standing in the holy place, run. Not pause and pray about it, not wait and see. Run. So he gets very specific. If you're in Judea, flee to the mountains. If you're on the roof, if you're on the roof, don't even go back inside to grab your stuff. If you're in the field, don't go back to your cloak. That's urgency, no hesitation. This isn't a drill. And then he describes a time of distress unlike anything before or after. If those days weren't cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. So even in judgment, there's mercy. Then comes another warning. People will claim, here is the Messiah, or there he is, and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So again, don't be easily impressed. Just because something looks powerful or spiritual doesn't mean it's from God. Jesus makes it clear. When he returns, it won't be secret. It won't be hidden in some desert or whispered about in some inner rooms. As lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man. Translation, you won't miss it. No confusion, no guessing. So then he paints the intense picture. The sun darkened, the moon not giving its light, stars falling, heavenly bodies shaken, creating itself, or creation itself reacting. I kind of combined creating and reacting in my head. Creation itself reacting. And then the sign of the Son of Man appears in heaven. All the nations mourn, and they will see him coming on the cloud with power and great glory. Not humble donkey this time, full authority. So at the end of Matthew, is it at the end of Matthew? No, actually, this is going to be in Acts. So Acts chapter 1, this is after the resurrection, right? Jesus is still here on earth. And then, doing his final commands to the disciples, whatever. And then after that, he goes back to heaven, right? So the way it was explained is that he ascended, right, to heaven, and everybody watched him ascend until they couldn't see him anymore. The way he ascended is going to be the same way he will descend back to earth. So you will see, and it's going to be majestic. And anyways, so so he sends his angels. He sends his angels with a loud trumpet, called to gather his people from all over the earth. That's the moment. So it's going to be loud too. Anyways, so then Jesus brings it back down with a simple analogy. The fig tree again. I love the fig tree. When its branches become tender and leaves come out, you know summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things, you know it's close. Not exact timing, but awareness. You kind of just know. And then he drops the line that humbles literally everyone. But about that day or hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. So, all the timeline obsessed energy, yeah, not helpful. If even that information is not, not shared. Maybe we should relax a little on trying to calculate it, because nobody will ever know. Nobody. He compares it to the days of Noah. People were eating, drinking, marrying, living life like everything was normal right up until the flood came. No warning bells. They chose um no warning bells they chose to listen to. Just sudden realization like, oh, and that's how it will be. Ordinary life, then suddenly not so ordinary. It's just going to be bam. And then yeah. So two people will be in the field. One taken, the other left. Two women grinding grain, one taken, the other left. It's about separation. Not everyone continues on the same path. So what's the instruction? Keep watch. Not figure it out, not predict it, but stay ready every second of your life. Every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, of every week, every month, because you don't know when it's going to happen. He compares it to a homeowner who would have stayed alert if they knew when a thief was coming, right? The point is readiness, not prediction. Be prepared, be ready. Then he ends with a contrast. A faithful and wise servant who stays ready doing what they're supposed to do when the master returns, versus a wicked servant who assumes there's plenty of time, starts slacking, even mistreating others. The master returns unexpectedly, and the consequences are not light. So this chapter isn't meant to make you paranoid, it's meant to make you prepared. Prepare. There's a difference. Jesus isn't giving a step-by-step countdown. He's shaping your mindset. Stay alert, stay grounded. Don't get pulled into deception or fear. And that, love growing cold part, that's probably one of the most relevant warnings. It's easy to become numb when the world feels chaotic. But Jesus calls for endurance, not withdrawal. Also, notice how much of this is about character, not just events. Faithfulness, awareness, perseverance. It's less about when will this happen and more about who will you be when it does. Will you be prepared or not? Okay, fun fact corner. So the abomination that causes desolation likely pointed to events the disciples would later recognize, especially the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, but it also carries a future dimension. It's one of those layered prophecies. Also, the Mount of Olives, where Jesus is giving this talk, becomes significant later in prophecy as well, not random location choice. So Jesus continues right where, the last chapter left off, pretty much, in this chapter. Still talking about being ready, but now he switches into story mode. First up, 10 virgins waiting for a bridegroom. This is another parable, the parable of the 10 virgins. So think wedding vibes. Late night anticipation, everyone dressed and holding lamps. 5 of them are wise and 5 are foolish. So what's the difference? So what makes you wise and foolish? It's the oil. So the wise ones bring extra oil for their lamps. The foolish ones bring just enough to look prepared, but not enough to stay prepared. And of course, the bridegroom is delayed. Because apparently waiting is a part of the test. Um, that's always been a part of the test, right? Everyone gets sleepy. Everyone dozes off. So it's not about never getting tired. Um, it's about what you did before you got tired. At midnight, the announcement hits. The bridegroom is here. So, lamps are lit, and suddenly the foolish ones realize they're running out of oil. Now they're scrambling, asking the wise ones to share. And the wise ones are like, if we do that, none of us will have enough left. You need to go get your own. Go to the store and buy oil for yourself. That sounds harsh at first. So, some things in your walk with God can't be borrowed. You can't rely on someone else's faith, someone else's preparation, someone else's relationship with God. It doesn't transfer like that. So, the foolish ones leave to buy oil, and while they're gone, the bridegroom arrives. The prepared ones go in with him to the wedding banquet, and then the door is shut. Later, the others come back knocking, Lord, Lord, open the door for us. And the response, I don't know you. That line is heavy because they weren't strangers to the event. They were invited, they were present, they looked the part even, but they weren't actually ready. Jesus wraps it with, therefore, keep watch because you do not know the day or the hour. Always be prepared. As I said, every second, prepared. Then he keeps going. Next story, a man going on a journey entrusts his servants with his wealth. Um, So, yeah, a man going on a journey entrusts his servants with his wealth. So, to one, he gives 5 bags of gold, to another, 2 bags, and then to the third one bag. So, each according to their ability. So, already, not everyone gets the same assignment, right? But everyone gets something. So, the first 2 servants get to work immediately. They invest, they multiply what they were given. 5 turns into 10, and then in the 2 it turns into 4. The third servant, who had 1 bag, buries his bag of gold. Was it bag of gold? Yeah. Literally digs a hole and hides it. No risk, no growth, just preservation, right? After a long time, the master returns and settles accounts. The first 2 servants are praised. Well done. Good job, faithful servants. Same reward, by the way, even though they started with different amounts, that's important. God isn't comparing your result to someone else's. He's looking at what you did with what you were given. So what are you doing with what God has given you? Anyways, so then comes the third servant, and instead of owning his inaction, he blames the master. I knew you were a hard man, so I was afraid. Fear turned into passivity. And that turned into wasted opportunity. The master calls him out, not for failing, but for doing nothing. He didn't even try. The 1 bag is taken and given to the servant who has 10, and the unproductive servant is thrown out. Again, not like consequences. So this story isn't about talent in the modern sense. It's about stewardship. Time, gifts, opportunities, influence, whatever God has placed in your hands, doing nothing with it is not the move, right? And then Jesus goes into the final scene, and this one feels less like a story and more like a courtroom. He describes the Son of Man coming in his glory, angels with him sitting on his throne, um, and all nations gathered before him. This is judgment, clear and final. He separates people like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. Sheep on his right and goats on his left. And the criteria, this is where it gets real. To the sheep, he says, come, you who are blessed, inherit the kingdom. Why? For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. And they're confused. When did we do all that for you? And he answered, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine you did for me. So it wasn't about big flashy acts. It was about everyday compassion. How you treat people who can't benefit you. How you show up for the overlooked, the struggling, the inconvenient. Then he turns to the goats. And it's the opposite. Depart from me. Why? Because they didn't do those things. They didn't feed, didn't help, didn't care. And they're also confused. When did we see you and not help you? And the answer is the same principle. Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. And just like that, the chapter ends with two very different outcomes. Eternal life for some, external separation for others. No gray area, no middle. It's just one or the other. So this chapter is basically a three-part check on your readiness. The 10 virgins ask, are you spiritually prepared or just looking prepared? The talents ask, are you using what God gave you or playing it safe and doing nothing? And the sheep and goats ask, does your faith actually show up in how you treat people? And none of these are about perfection. They're about direction. Are you moving toward God, growing, acting, loving, or just sitting in a comfortable version of faith that doesn't cost you anything? Also, the whole I was hungry, thirsty, a stranger part, it quietly destroys the idea that faith is just personal and private. Apparently, how you treat people is a direct reflection of of your relationship with God, right? No pressure. All right, fun fact corner. So the lamps the virgins carried, they needed constant oil to stay lit. Without oil, they're extinguished, right? Which makes them a great symbol for ongoing spiritual readiness, not a one-time moment. Also, in that culture, it wasn't unusual for a bridegroom to arrive late at night, so the delay wasn't the surprise. The lack of preparation was actually, and then, yeah. So, so Jesus laid out what readiness looks like, how stewardship works, and what judgment considers. So naturally, the next chapter shifts from teaching about the future to walking straight into it. Well, not next chapter because we only have 3 chapters left. So the last episode, oh, it's gonna be the last episode for Matthew. Yeah, it's gonna get really heavy too. If you know the end, how the you know the Gospel of Matthew and or or each end of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Anyways, if you know, you know. But yeah, the cross is getting closer, and things are about to get very real, very fast. So, thank you for listening to Chapters and Chuckles by Kaye. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe. You can watch the episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Until next time, stay curious and stay blessed.